Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Welcome back to the Femininity series. And I do a lot of talking about dark femininity. I talk about feminine privilege on this channel. And today I want to talk about wounded femininity. So I believe that wounds can come from having toxic feminine women in your life. So, for example, maybe your mother was only using dark feminine tactics with you. So maybe she was catty or ruthless or cutthroat and she didn't know when to be soft and kind and nurturing. A lot of women who have any form of social privilege will experience a lot of jealousy and animosity from other women because think about it. How does it feel when you are the center of someone else's beauty standard? I mean, that's got to be pretty triggering for that person to know that you set the bar for their beauty, to know that you set the bar for their hair goals, you set the bar for their skin goals, you set the bar for their body goals. For some girls, they don't react well to that. And so I feel like your femininity can actually become wounded if you have a lot of people who are jealous against you, or if you have a lot of people policing your femininity. This happens a lot with women who come from religious backgrounds. I myself come from a very devout Christian background. So having people telling you you cannot wear makeup, you can't wear hoop earrings, you can't wear the color red, you're being fast. I know that that's something that happens to a lot of black women who have pretty privilege as children. So that can actually cause feminine wounds when you get older because a part of femininity is being carefree. And in order to be carefree, you have to be self accepting. You know, you have to be able to be free in expressing who you are. And so, for the women who have wounded femininity, there's this fear of being seen. And the fear of being seen can come from people telling you that, like, hey, men are going to molest you or they're going to look at you a certain way. So, you can't dress like this. And I feel like some women, they actually carry that fear into their adulthood. Women who struggle in their femininity, they tend to have this mindset of fear of what other people think of them. And this is not your normal, like, hey, I care about how I'm perceived. No, this is like the extreme version of it to where you don't actually want to wear the red lipstick because you don't want people to think you're trying too hard. You don't want people to think you're doing too much. Have you ever had somebody tell you that phrase? You're doing too much when it comes to like how you dress or showing off your beauty. That phrase is actually more of a gaslighting phrase that somebody will use when they're trying to police your femininity because that person, maybe she can't wear the red lipstick. Maybe she can't pull off that peasant top that you have on. She can't pull off a strapless bra or a strapless shirt. And so when she sees you wearing it, then she will say things like, you're doing too much. All of these comments can actually lead to you having a wounded feminine because they're taking away that carefree spirit. They're taking away that carefree femininity that you've always wanted to have. They don't want you to be carefree. They want you to care a lot about what others think of you. I've also noticed a lot of red pill or manosphere incels saying this rhetoric like, oh, you're a 6 out of 10. You're just a 5 out of 10. You're not pretty. You're a 2 out of 10. And they're saying that because they don't want you to feel carefree in your beauty. They don't want you to feel carefree with who you are. A part of femininity is being able to express yourself and have no inhibitions. And so anytime you have someone in your life who is purposely trying to make you feel insecure, they are trying to wound your femininity, whether they realize it or not. Another sign of having wounded femininity is not being grounded in reality. So, for example, when I say grounded in reality, I'm not talking about being realistic because I do think you should have dreams and goals. But when I say not being grounded, what I mean is you're constantly in your head, stressed out about what do white people think of me? What do black people think of me? Does she think she's better than me? Wait a minute, she's really pretty. Does she think she's prettier than me? That energy of kind of constantly analyzing other people's thoughts about you and kind of being so in your head to the point where you feel paralyzed, that is actually a sign of wounded femininity. And it also leads to self sabotage because you're in this state of analysis paralysis. Like, oh, can I pull off red lipstick? Am I too dark to pull off red lipstick? Wait a minute. Am I ugly? Why didn't he swipe on me on the dating app? All of that is a sign of not being grounded in reality. You're not enjoying what's in front of you. You're not enjoying the beauty in the mirror or the beauty in front of you. You're not enjoying the life that you have right now because you're so in your head, kind of analyzing what other people are doing. So I've noticed that that's a sign of wounded feminine. Another sign of wounded femininity is not being able to receive. So, not able to receive compliments. Maybe there's a woman who is not able to receive some form of constructive criticism. So, for example, when it comes to my YouTube channel, if somebody criticizes me, or even in real life, let's say somebody is my enemy, I know how to receive wisdom from my enemies. And I actually think that receiving wisdom and intel from your enemies is one of the most powerful forms of alchemy that exists. When I use that term alchemy, what I mean is transmuting negative things into positive things. So, women who have wounded femininity, they don't know all of the different forms of receiving. They only know how to receive maybe a gift or something. They don't know how to receive in any scenario. So, one thing that I like to do is I like to learn from my enemies. I like to learn from the people I don't like. I like to examine people that I dislike and say, hey, what positive traits does she have? And then I will take on those qualities for myself. I will receive her positive qualities and take them on as my own. So if I notice that there's a girl who's really catty and she's really cutthroat with me at work, I will think to myself, okay, what is she good at though, socially? Okay, she's good at guarding her territory. You know, she's good at tapping into her masculine side and guarding the things that she cares about. That is a good quality. Let me receive that for myself. But women who have wounded femininity, they don't have the ability to receive. They can only receive basic stuff like maybe some gifts or something obvious, but they don't know how to receive gifts that are not wrapped in a pretty bow. So I believe that some gifts come wrapped in a nice box and a nice bow, and then there are other gifts that just come in a basic envelope. So there are some women who know how to receive the pretty ones, but they don't know how to receive when the wisdom looks ugly at first. They don't know how to interact with people from different cultures and different backgrounds and still learn from them. One thing that I've realized is that there is really something you can learn from everyone. There's something you can learn from every culture, from every race, from women of every skin tone, women of every hair texture, from women of every political background, gender, gay, straight. But women who have a wounded feminine, they don't know about all of the different forms of receiving. If I look at my life, I just feel like there are so many ways that I can receive feedback. But if a woman has wounded femininity, she gets very easily offended. So it makes it difficult for her to receive feedback because she doesn't understand that feedback actually helps her to become a better woman. Feedback can help her to become more confident. And don't get me wrong, you can pick and choose who you want to receive from. But I've noticed that one thing that really helps me to grow the fastest is if I receive even from my enemies, like if I receive feedback from them. So even if somebody is gossiping or if they're criticizing me, did you know that my fashion sense actually improved partially because haters were gossiping about me? There was one thing that a hater said one time, and it was actually true. She was correct. She was like, "Oh, the skirts that she wears, the hem of her skirt is always ripped in the back. Like at the bottom, lower part of my skirt, apparently the hem was ripped. And I didn't realize that. And it turns out I examined the types of skirts I was buying. And yeah, those were cheap skirts where the hems were ripping off. And so instead of me just getting offended and saying, well, F her, I actually was able to learn from that and grow. So that is still a form of receiving. I was receiving feedback, even if it came from a negative source. And I actually improved from there. And then I was able to flex on her the next time I saw her. But no, another sign of the wounded feminine is inability to reflect, not being introspective. These are the women who don't know how to look at themselves. They don't know how to address their own insecurities, their own inferiority complexes. These are the types of women that are constantly passing the blame, constantly shifting the blame onto others. Have you ever seen those narcissistic mothers where the daughter will say, hey, mom, you're being really mean to me. And then the mom will say, well, my mom was mean to me. My mom was way worse than I am to you. So she's actually not being reflective. She's not reflecting on her own parenting. She's actually deflecting. And she would rather talk about her victimhood or, she'd rather talk about how bad it is for her as opposed to being reflective on her interactions with you. That is a sign of wounded femininity. It's the inability to reflect on your strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. One of the biggest signs of a woman who does not have any femininity is a woman who doesn't even know her own weaknesses, or she's too scared to address her own weaknesses. And I just feel like the best example of that is with toxic mothers who they will never apologize to their children. They'll never like say sorry for abusing their children. They won't acknowledge if they disrespected their daughters and stuff. By the way, I do recommend that you just cut your parent off or have little to no contact if you have a parent that's like that. But that's something that I see a lot with toxic mothers. Something else that is a sign of wounded feminine is actually weakness, being emotionally weak, being mentally weak and undisciplined, not knowing how to go after your goals, maybe being too scared to go after your goals. I actually think that being strong is a form of femininity. So, you know how people say, oh, I don't like being called a strong woman. I don't like being associated with strength because that means I'm being masculine. I love it when people recognize my strength. I love it when people tell me that I'm strong minded or that I've got like a tough spirit or I have like a strong heart, because a part of femininity is having courage. Remember, it takes courage to be carefree. It takes courage to express yourself. It takes courage to embrace your uniqueness. Maybe you have a very unique sense of style and you've always wanted to express that. A part of femininity is having the strength to express yourself with your fashion, express yourself with your makeup. This is about more than just being pretty on this channel. It's not about the outer beauty. It's about caring for yourself and being strong enough to actually acknowledge your beauty, being strong enough to talk about the downsides that can come with your beauty, being strong enough to come online and to have a pretty girl support group where you're able to uplift other pretty women. I just feel like strength is actually a part of femininity. So if somebody is not feminine, I feel like they are very weak-minded. So they can't acknowledge another woman's beauty. They have a hard time maybe complimenting other women. Maybe they have a scarcity mindset of there can only be one. There can only be one pretty girl in the room. There can only be one pretty girl in the friend group. There can only be one girl online talking about pretty privilege, or there can only be one pretty girl in the office. All of that is a sign of wounded femininity because it shows that she's very mentally weak. It shows that her self-esteem is actually very weak. Another sign of wounded femininity is the lack of boundaries. Oftentimes, women who come from abusive homes tend to have a lack of boundaries because maybe their parents were always violating their boundaries. Their mother was always violating their emotional boundaries. Maybe their father was violating her physical boundaries. Maybe she had a narcissistic parent, and so she struggles with codependency and people pleasing. All of these are signs of a wounded feminine. Maybe she struggles with inferiority complex in comparison to white people, and so she has more of a people pleasing mindset with white men. Or she has a people pleasing, chasing, pick me energy around white men or around rich men. Wherever the inferiority complex comes from, it's very easy to tell because that person will jump through hoops and they'll do all this buck dancing and shucking and jiving for the person that they feel is superior to them. So that shows a lack of boundaries, which is tied to having a sense of wounded femininity. So not knowing where your own identity begins and ends, not knowing the difference between who you are as an individual and the group that you come from. So I've noticed a lot of women, they over-identify with others. That's actually a sign of having weak boundaries because it's like, no, other women, they don't represent me. Like, they don't have to represent me if I don't want them to. So just because this other woman with my same race or phenotype behaves in a way that is ratchet or a way that's trashy, that doesn't mean that I have to associate myself with being trashy. That doesn't mean that I have to get all upset and worked up. Oh, she's making me look bad. She's making me look trashy. She's causing me to be stereotyped. No, I can't worry about things that I cannot control. I can't control another woman's trashy behavior, but I can control myself because I have a boundary between my identity and the collective identity of my group. But the women who struggle with their femininity, they struggle with boundaries. Boundaries are a part of femininity. So they're struggling with their boundaries between who are Black women as a whole and who am I personally as a Black woman. So these are the women who will go online and they will police how you wear your hair, other women within your group. It's because of an over identification and a lack of emotional and identity boundaries. Kind of like how parents will sometimes pressure their children to be a doctor. Hey, you come from a long line of doctors. We're all doctors. When you go outside, you're representing me, so you need to become a doctor. Sometimes they will use their family name in order to cross your emotional boundaries. But what if you didn't want to be a doctor? What if you wanted to be an artist, or you want to be an engineer or something else? But a sign of the wounded feminine is lack of boundaries, emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, and even boundaries around your identity. Another thing that I've noticed when it comes to wounded femininity is lack of empathy. So I'm thinking of toxic mothers. So these are mothers who have no empathy for their babies, no empathy for their children, no empathy for their little daughter who has insecurities. Maybe the mother is putting down her daughter. Maybe the grandmother was putting down her mother, and then the mother put down her daughter. So there's this generational curse of having a lack of empathy. That's actually a sign of not tapping into femininity. Femininity is nurturing, and I personally feel like nurturing should be done to yourself. You should know how to nurture yourself. You should know how to nurture your children if you have children. And so sometimes women who have wounded femininity, they lack empathy. And so they cannot nurture their children. But another sign of wounded femininity is not having empathy for yourself, not being able to nurture yourself. It's having resentment against yourself. So these are the women who practice self-sabotaging. So they won't start the business because maybe they had a business and they failed before. And so they're not going to start a second business because they never forgave themselves for failing the first time. They never forgave themselves for the first YouTube channel that failed. So they're not going to start a second one because they just don't believe in themselves anymore. So it's having a lack of empathy for yourself, having a lack of compassion, and a lack of nurturing for yourself. Sometimes women will go out and fail because they didn't nurture themselves beforehand. They didn't prepare. Preparing is a form of nurturing. Just like how you prepare your children for the world, preparing yourself for the world is actually a part of femininity because you're nurturing yourself. You're having empathy towards yourself. You're having compassion towards yourself. Before I even did this YouTube channel, I took a whole course on how to grow an online business, how to grow a YouTube channel, how to do personal branding. That was a form of nurturing my own skill in this area and investing in myself because I felt like I was worth it. And I had empathy for myself in the sense of, hey, I know what it was like to want to start a YouTube channel, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to say. So practicing a form of self-compassion is a part of femininity. Another sign of someone who is wounded in this area is a woman who is not magnetic. That's a sign that you actually have some form of wounded femininity because when I think of femininity, I think of a magnetic woman. I think of someone who walks in the room. She's oozing with self-love and confidence, and she expresses herself in her own unique way to the point where she is naturally magnetic. And I think there's a misconception that being magnetic means that you have to be extroverted, you have to be seductive. Those are just two different manifestations of being magnetic. That personality trait of magnetism is not a monolith. So you can be magnetic in many different ways. Do you have a magnetic laugh? Like, are you one of those people to where when you laugh, other people start laughing, or when you smile, other people smile back at you? That's actually a sign of being magnetic because you doing that thing, it causes other people to do that. I know that for me, I'm the type of person where if I am friends with someone, then other girls are going to want to be friends with her. That means that I have a magnetic, friendly type of persona. I have kind of a friendly type of energy. So being magnetic should be a natural part of your femininity. So if you find yourself repelling others all the time, like there are some women, they repel friendships, they repel healthy relationships. They have high conflict personalities. Having a high conflict personality means that obviously that woman would not be magnetic because she's getting angry and offended at every turn. Maybe she's arguing about politics randomly, or she's the type where maybe she will be rude to the waitresses. She will be complaining at the restaurants. Everywhere you go, they complain. That's a sign of wounded femininity because your magnetism is gone. You're not magnetizing your desires, you're not magnetizing others, you're actually repelling others, or you are repelling your desires. I actually feel like a part of innate femininity is being able to attract exactly what you want. So being attractive, not just physically, but also being mentally attractive, being psychologically attractive, being emotionally attractive. And when I say that word attractive, what I mean is getting what you want emotionally. So getting the princess treatment should be a natural part of your life. Not just the princess treatment from men, but the princess treatment from your friends, knowing how to attract the right friend group to where you are celebrated amongst your friends. I hear a lot of people saying, go where you're celebrated, but they're not using that same rhetoric in terms of friendships. They're only making it male centered. They're making it all about men. Oh, the only way you can be celebrated is around men. And it's like, no, you can be celebrated by your own family members, by, I don't know, your coworkers or your friends. So a woman who lacks magnetism and she repels her desires, a woman who repels what she wants, that's actually a sign of wounded femininity because you don't know how to attract your goals. By the way, if you want to magnetize your goals to yourself, self discipline is the highest form of self love. So, being disciplined to create your online business, being disciplined to do the workout, every time that you practice discipline, you're getting one step closer to your goals. You're actually magnetizing your goals closer to you. Another sign of a wounded feminine woman would be a woman who is not supportive. So she's not supportive of her daughter. Maybe she's not supportive of her family members. She just doesn't know how to support herself. Maybe she's codependent, financially codependent. She's struggling to the point where she is hoping that some man will come sweep her off of her feet and save her from all of her financial woes. So she's very passive when it comes to her own personal financial goals. I tell you guys all the time, it's great to have goals, but a man is not a plan. A man is a human being. You can't control other human beings. So yes, a man might pick you, but spending your whole life just wishing and hoping to be picked, that's not being proactive. So the women who have kind of this wounded femininity, they don't know how to be proactive with themselves. They don't know how to be supportive towards themselves to the point where maybe they don't know how to even pay their bills. They don't know how to be an adult on their own because they're very codependent. So anytime you see a woman who struggles with a lot of financial codependency, a lot of emotional codependency, it's because she lacks that supportive characteristic. She doesn't know how to support herself. How can you give someone else something that you don't even have? How can you give someone else support if you don't even support yourself? And this is why I tell women never to be super close to women who have low self esteem, because if she doesn't even like herself, what makes you think she's going to like you? If she doesn't love herself, what makes you think she's going to love and support you? Another sign of wounded femininity is lack of vulnerability. So there are some women who come from very rough backgrounds, and maybe vulnerability was something where you would get made fun of. Maybe she grew up with parents who said things like, stop crying, or I'm going to give you a reason to cry. So that vulnerability of shedding tears because you're sad, that was discouraged. Or the women who don't know how to express their emotions without yelling and screaming and cursing. The women who don't know how to disagree with someone and remain respectful. These women often lack vulnerability. There is so much strength and so much beauty in vulnerability. It takes a lot of courage, and it actually takes a lot of confidence and self-esteem to be able to be emotionally open, to talk about what you want, like in terms of relationships. That's another area where I've noticed some women struggle in their femininity, struggling to be emotionally vulnerable, struggling to share how you feel without having an emotional explosion. I've noticed that some women, they don't know how to emotionally regulate themselves, and so vulnerability emotionally dysregulates them. So they actually can't be vulnerable. But being vulnerable helps you so much because you attract people who want to help you. If I am too scared to ask for help, I'm not going to get the help. I'm just going to be stuck trying to figure it out on my own. That would be like if I'm too prideful to go to the doctor's office. There actually are people like this where they're too prideful, or they just don't want to be vulnerable in any way. They don't want to talk about their health problems. They don't want to address their weight problems with their friends or family or doctor or whoever can help them. So that's a sign of wounded femininity because remember, femininity is being able to be carefree and expressive. And so it takes a lot of vulnerability to express yourself because obviously you are risking being rejected. Women who can't be vulnerable, they fear rejection. That's why they're not being open. That's why they're not being honest. That's why they're not able to be transparent. So these are the types of women who come online and lie and pretend like their lives are perfect all the time. They pretend like they don't have any struggles. They pretend like they don't have any insecurities. I've noticed that's a really big theme online where people try to pretend like they are this perfect, confident person. I tell you guys all the time there's no such thing as a perfectly confident person. There's no such thing as a person who's perfectly confident 100% of the time. Everybody has insecurities, everybody has vulnerabilities. And so if a woman lacks vulnerability, she lacks relatability. And if you're not able to relate to other human beings, you're going to find yourself repelling them. So this is tied to that whole magnetism thing that I just talked about. You won't be able to be magnetic because you can't even attract the type of guy you want, the type of friends you want, because you don't know how to be vulnerable. No one even knows who you are. They don't know your actual personality. They don't know your actual sense of humor. So I've noticed that some women, they just struggle with that. They struggle with being authentic because in order to be authentic, you have to have some form of vulnerability and you have to be willing to risk getting rejected. And that actually leads me to my next point of women who have wounded femininity. They don't have the power to be authentically themselves. So these women, they might rely on a lot of fake things. So maybe they rely on fake personas or I don't know, like trying to use materialism or use external things to make them appear a certain way, but deep down inside, that's not who they are. These are the types of women who will change up their entire personality to fit into what a guy wants. Maybe she will change up everything because, oh, this type of guy, he likes this. So even though I don't like basketball, I'm going to start playing basketball just so I can impress him. These are the types of women who are always spinning their wheels because they're not able to show who they really are. They're constantly putting on all of these masks. They're doing this thing where they're masking who they are because they're hoping that that mask will magnetize the things that they want. They're hoping that by wearing this personality mask or by wearing even a physical mask of some sort or by doing all of these things to try to catch attention, hopefully somebody out there will love me. So it's rooted in a fear of rejection. That's a sign of wounded femininity. Another thing I've noticed is that women who lack in their femininity, they don't know how to get into a state of flowing through life. They don't know how to do that. I've noticed that a lot of the women who have wounded femininity tend to be uptight, and maybe this is because their mothers were always uptight. So once again, it goes back to not being able to be carefree, not being able to just let things flow. These types of women who struggle with their femininity, they're very controlling usually. So controlling over their own appearance. Maybe they struggle with things like eating disorders or being very insecure about how they do their makeup, and they have so much anxiety around makeup or hair or extensions. So they put pressure on themselves for everything to be perfect so bad to the point where they end up just blending in. Just it flops really badly because they don't know how to flow through life. They don't know how to let their hair frizz up just a little bit and, just have fun and play in the flowers, frolic through the flowers, get wet on the beach or something. Like the women who don't know how to go with the flow, sometimes these women, they become emotionally dysregulated if something unexpected happens. So if their hair gets a little frizzy, they freak out. If their makeup gets a little bit smeared, they're anxious. If their clothes get a little bit wet from the rain, they're in a bad mood the rest of the day because they don't know how to flow through life effortlessly. And that's because those women fear not having control. And so anytime something uncontrollable happens, like the weather or, something where it's messing up their plans, those types of women will become emotionally dysregulated. Another sign of the wounded feminine is she puts in so much effort to the point where she exhausts herself. So think about this in terms of beauty. I don't mind putting effort into my appearance, but I'm not going to starve myself just to be skinny because I just feel like that's putting in so much effort to the point where I'm actually harming myself. in order to achieve a particular goal. So, a part of femininity is effortlessness in the sense that you're able to be who you are, you can go with the flow. You may not be perfect. You know how to accept your imperfections because that ties back into vulnerability. And so, the women who don't know how to be effortless, these women often struggle in their femininity as well because, once again, it goes back to wanting to have complete control over everything. So, everything has to be perfect, which is impossible. So they're always going to feel like they're not enough because they're never going to achieve perfection because it doesn't exist. Another thing that I think of when I think of a wounded feminine woman is she doesn't know how to surrender. So when I think of a woman who is feminine, I'm thinking of someone who can just lay outside in the sunshine and just kind of surrender to the sunlight. You just kind of soak in the sun. You're not worried about, oh my God, I'm going to get cancer if I am in the sun for 5 seconds. No, you're able to just surrender in that moment. And then whatever happens, happens. So the women who lack that ability to surrender, these women have a hard time because they're going to try to maybe control others. They might try to manipulate other people. These are your emotionally manipulative sisters, your emotionally manipulative mothers, the manipulative women at work who will go out of their way to make up lies about you. It's because they don't know how to surrender and trust the process. They don't know how to trust the process of doing their job and, everything working out. And so they're actually being controlled by fear. And they're not able to just be carefree and rest in their femininity. They're not able to do that because they can't surrender to that. They can't surrender to trusting others. They're unable to trust people. They're unable to vet people. Of course, you can't trust anybody if you don't know how to be vulnerable yourself, because I wouldn't trust another person who can't be vulnerable with me. Something else that I consider to be wounded femininity is women who are closed off. So, closed minded women, women who are closed off in terms of body language, they're closed off emotionally. So, these are women who are emotionally unavailable to be your friend, emotionally unavailable to have any positive emotional experiences. You have to remember the thing about emotions. When it comes to that, if I am emotionally closed off to everyone, I also don't get to experience the joy of positive emotional interactions. I think that a lot of people only think of emotional availability in terms of relationships, but no, there's a such thing as being an emotionally unavailable friend, being an emotionally unavailable sister. So some of these women, maybe they were raised around other emotionally unavailable women. And so she took on those qualities, not realizing that she's closing herself off from positive friendships. She's closing herself off from having positive mentors or having a healthy relationship. Another thing that I want to talk about is creativity. I associate creativity with being feminine. So if a woman has wounded femininity, these women are going to have a very hard time being in their creative energy because I just feel like it takes a lot of mental freedom. Your mind has to be freed up in order for you to be creative. So if you're lacking in creativity, usually it's because your brain is kind of focused on other things. You're focused on logistics. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to survive? I'm struggling. I need to get out of this abusive relationship. I need to get out of this bad situation. All of those worries and stuff, those things stop your creativity from flowing. So being in a constant state of survival mode, that is actually a part of potentially having wounded femininity because maybe your mother, maybe your role model, your female role model, your guardian as a child, maybe she was always in struggle mode. Maybe she was always trying to provide for your dad and yourself and everybody else. And so she was not able to be creative because she was too busy just trying to survive. That's actually a sign of wounded femininity. And that goes back to support, not knowing how to support yourself, not knowing how to socially strategize so that you can support yourself. That way you can free up the mental space so that you can have the energy to be creative. In order to be creative, you cannot be like extremely stressed out. And so the less stress you have, the more creative you're able to be. And so stress actually wounds your feminine identity because the stress is clouding out all of your creative ideas. Anyway, that's my take on what the wounded feminine is. What do you ladies think? Have you been raised by a wounded woman? Are you struggling with any of these things? I know that I have struggled with every single one of these things. But let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.